Hours before a stranger entered their home, 6-year-old Logan Tipton was building gingerbread houses with his mother and helping her hang Christmas lights. Those same lights may later have drawn that stranger to the family's door. But on Monday, December 7th, 2015, they were simply decorations. The Tiptons lived in Versailles, Kentucky. Heather and Dean were raising 5 children, and with 7 people under one roof, quiet one-on-one time was rare. That day, however, Heather had time off from her job at Amazon. In December, during the company's peak season, that almost never happened. So Heather and Logan made the most of it. They picked out a Christmas tree and bought new lights. They made homemade candy and decorated gingerbread houses. It was nothing elaborate. Just a mother and her little boy spending a cold December day getting their home ready for Christmas. You know what gets me about days like that? Nobody recognizes them as final memories while they're happening. They feel ordinary right up until they become priceless. That evening, Heather was offered an overtime shift. She hadn't planned to work, but the pay was time and a half, and Christmas was coming. A family with 5 children could use the extra money. While Heather got ready, Logan sat on the bathroom toilet and watched her fix her hair and put on her makeup. He just wanted to be near her. Before it was time for Heather to leave, the two of them even curled up together for a short nap. Then Heather kissed Dean goodbye and hugged all 5 children. She expected to see everyone the next morning. Instead, those ordinary moments with Logan, the Christmas tree, the gingerbread houses, the nap, would become the last full day she ever had with her son. Later that night, all 5 children were asleep together in an upstairs bedroom. Dean was downstairs. Heather was at work. The house had gone still, with the new Christmas lights glowing outside. Then 11-year-old Coral woke up. At first, she didn't understand why. She stirred, rubbed her eyes, and looked toward the source of the noise. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether she was fully awake or still caught inside a nightmare. There was a man in the bedroom. He wasn't her father. He wasn't a family friend. Coral had never seen him before. And he was standing over Logan. The stranger held 2 knives. One was a large butcher knife. The other was an ordinary butter knife from the family's kitchen. As Coral's eyes adjusted, she knew immediately that something had already happened to her little brother. She was 11 years old. She was waking from a dead sleep. There was an armed adult between her and Logan, and she went after him. Coral shouted for the man to get away from her brother. When he didn't, she climbed out of bed, kicked at him, and grabbed for his hands, trying to take the knives away. Somehow, she managed to wrestle the butter knife from him. Then the intruder changed. The aggression vanished from his voice. He spoke softly and calmly, asking Coral to hand the knife back. And she did. That can be difficult to understand from the safety of the outside world. But Coral was a terrified child trapped in a bedroom with a stranger holding a butcher knife. His sudden calm may have seemed like a way to keep him from becoming violent again, or at least to buy a few more seconds. Once he had the butter knife back, his attention shifted completely from Logan to Coral. He slowly moved the dull blade along the edges of her body, as though deciding what to do next. Then he used it to make a shallow cut across her nose. By now, another child was awake. Coral's younger sister Lily saw what was happening, slipped quietly out of bed, and made it through the bedroom door without the stranger noticing. He was too focused on Coral. Lily ran downstairs and woke Dean. Imagine being pulled from sleep by your frightened daughter telling you there is a man in the children's room. There is no time to decide whether she dreamed it, no time to make sense of it. Dean got up and ran for the stairs. Halfway up, he heard a man's voice coming from the bedroom. Deep, angry, completely unfamiliar. Clean your fucking rooms! That was the moment any possibility of a nightmare disappeared. Lily had not been confused. An armed stranger really was upstairs with Dean's children. Dean kept climbing. When he reached the top of the stairs, the stranger was already moving toward him with a knife. Dean had reached his children, but before he could understand who the man was, he had to stop him. While Dean fought the intruder, one of his children reached a phone. The first description given to the dispatcher was terrifyingly simple. There was a robber in their room. Upstairs, Dean had no idea whether the stranger was alone. He only knew that the man had knives and was moving through a bedroom crowded with children. The 2 men collided near the top of the stairs. Dean tried to control the intruder's hands, forced the blades away from the children, and put his own body between them and whatever happened next. There was no time to plan. Every second the man remained armed was another second one of Dean's children could be hurt. They struggled back into the bedroom. Dean demanded answers. Who are you? Why are you in my house? The stranger's response made no sense. This is my fucking house. Think about how disorienting that must have been. Dean was fighting an armed man inside his own children's bedroom, and that man seemed completely convinced that Dean was the intruder. As Dean kept wrestling with him, Coral grabbed a nearby phone and called for help. She initially told the dispatcher there were several robbers in the room. In that chaos, the darkness, the screaming, children waking around her, she could not know whether there was one attacker or more.
Versailles, 911. We have a robbery in our room. You have a what? We got one. We have a robber in my room.
That call did exactly what it needed to do. It told police that children were trapped in a bedroom with an intruder, and officers moved immediately. They reached the Tipton home in approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds is an extraordinary response time. But inside that house, it was still long enough for an entire family's life to split into before and after. The officers rushed upstairs and joined Dean in bringing the stranger under control. They disarmed him, forced him down, and secured him in handcuffs. The immediate threat was over. Then came the head count. In a room filled with frightened children, overturned bedding, and the aftermath of a violent struggle, Dean and the officers tried to work out who was there, who had escaped, and who had been injured. Coral had the shallow cut across her nose. Later criminal charges would identify assaults against another sibling as well as Dean. Some accounts reported more serious injuries to two of the girls, but the available court record is clearer about the assaults than it is about the precise extent of every child's wounds. And then they found Logan. He was not responding. He was not moving. He was not breathing. Dean lifted his 6-year-old son into his arms. Later, he said Logan looked up at him, closed his eyes, and was gone. Dean remembered holding him as he took his final breath. There are parts of a case that remain almost impossible to absorb, no matter how many times you hear them. This is one of them. Dean had fought his way upstairs. He had helped hold the attacker until police arrived. He had done everything a parent is supposed to do in an emergency. And still, he could not get there in time. The officers understood immediately how serious Logan's condition was. Their body camera audio captures them calling for every available resource, reporting that a little boy had been stabbed and was no longer breathing.
Come on, we got to go. This little boy's, come on. We got to get him. Somebody broke in and stabbed him. Somebody broke in and killed this little boy. Somebody broke in and stabbed this little boy. We need everything. He's not breathing. The little kid's not breathing.
You can hear the urgency in that response. They were asking for everything. More officers, medical help, anyone who might give Logan a chance. They began CPR. But the attack had started before Coral woke and before Lily could run downstairs. By the time Dean reached the bedroom, the fatal injuries had already been inflicted. By the time officers arrived 90 seconds after the emergency call, Logan could not be revived. He had sustained multiple stab wounds while asleep, including a wound to the head. At 6 years old, Logan Tipton died in his father's arms. The intruder, meanwhile, was alive, restrained, and still inside the house. Police did not have to search the neighborhood, issue a public warning, or develop a list of suspects. They had captured the person responsible at the scene. That should have provided at least one immediate answer. Instead, it created the first impossible-looking fact of the investigation. Coral did not recognize the man. Neither did her siblings. Dean had never seen him before, and when Heather learned what had happened, she did not know him either. The police had the person who carried out the attack. What they did not have was any connection between him, Logan, or the house on Douglas Avenue. Before this case became an argument about insanity, it was the story of a kindergartner who ended conversations with people he had just met by saying, "Love you, bye." That was Logan. He had started kindergarten at Simmons Elementary School only a few months earlier. Teachers and staff knew him as the little boy who was nearly always smiling. He joked around. He made friends without effort. His family said Logan didn't seem to distinguish between people he had known for years and people he had known for minutes. To him, almost everyone could be a friend. The photographs from school show that easy smile. Family pictures capture him at home, surrounded by the people he trusted. Then there are the football images, Logan in his uniform, wearing equipment that initially took some convincing to get him into. Because here's the funny part. At first, Logan didn't want to play. His father signed him up for a local youth team, but Logan wasn't interested. Then he put on the helmet. He tried on the rest of the gear. And suddenly, the family had the opposite problem. They could barely get him to take any of it off. Football became one of his favorite things. Logan wanted to play, but he also wanted to watch. If a game was on television, he was there. If the local high school team was playing, he wanted to see it in person. That transformation, from the child who didn't want to join the team to the one who practically lived in his helmet, became one of the stories people shared after his death.
His dad signed him up. He didn't want to play. And then he put his helmet and his equipment on and he couldn't get it off of him.
My heart just goes out to the family and to all the children, and it's devastating.
And that sympathy extended far beyond the people who had personally known him. Versailles and the wider Woodford County community seemed to understand that the Tiptons had not only lost Logan. His parents and siblings had been forced to experience that loss together, inside their own home. Hundreds of people attended Logan's visitation and funeral. The line at the funeral home stretched outside. Friends came, teachers came, teammates and relatives came. So did people who had never met Logan but felt they needed to show the family that they were not alone. At a nearby church, the local high school orchestra performed a concert to raise money for the Tiptons. Coaches and players from Logan's youth football league organized another memorial. They called it Logan's Last Game. During that service, Logan's casket was carried across the football field. Think about that image for a second. The field where a 6-year-old should have been running with his teammates became the place where coaches, players, relatives, and neighbors gathered to say goodbye. The helmet he once refused to remove now belonged to a life measured in photographs and stories. The community could celebrate Coral's courage. Dean could be told that he had run toward danger and fought an armed stranger for his children. But none of that changed how he judged himself. When Dean spoke publicly, he described a father's responsibility to protect his children. He praised Coral for fighting a grown man until he could reach the bedroom. Then he said the part that had clearly stayed with him. He still believed he had not been quick enough to save Logan.
Not right. Not right. As a father, your job is to protect your children. This girl right here, my oldest daughter, fought this guy off until I could get upstairs. She fought this grown man trying to kill him off until I got upstairs. I wasn't quick enough to get to Logan.
That is the cruel gap between what happened and how a parent can carry it. Dean reached the room, confronted the attacker, and helped stop him. Yet the only moment he could replay was the one he could not change. Meanwhile, investigators faced a different kind of gap. The Tiptons were not known to have enemies. Nothing in their lives suggested a dispute, a threat, or a reason anyone would target their children. The man arrested inside the house was not a relative, neighbor, or acquaintance. He did not even live in Kentucky. Police identified him as Ronald Exantus, a registered dialysis nurse from Indianapolis, Indiana. He had traveled roughly 3 hours from another state and ended up inside the bedroom of a child he had never met. Investigators could establish who Logan had been with painful clarity. A smiling new kindergartner, a natural friend, a reluctant football player who fell in love with the game. His absence was enormous because his presence had been enormous to the people around him. What nobody could explain was why Ronald Exantus had entered his room. Then police began speaking with Exantus, and his behavior suggested that the answer might not resemble a motive at all. A week earlier, Ronald Exantus had been the nurse who arrived on time, did his work, and went home. Then he stopped sleeping. During the drive from the Tipton home to the police station, Exantus seemed compelled to read everything he saw. Street signs, billboards, business names. At the station, he moved on to notices posted on the walls, then officers' name tags and job titles. His emotions changed just as quickly. He cried, became intensely angry, then appeared confused about where he was and why he was there. At other moments, he spoke with absolute certainty about things that had never happened. He accused officers of forcing his car off the road before arresting him, but there had been no traffic stop. Police had arrested Exantus inside the Tipton home. Intake officers did not believe he appeared intoxicated by alcohol or drugs. What they did observe were signs of a possible mental health crisis. Whether Exantus could not explain himself or simply would not, investigators were getting nowhere, so they began looking backward. In Indianapolis, Exantus had worked as a dialysis nurse. Coworkers and patients liked him. He was dependable, punctual, focused, and known to go beyond what the job required. He had no known criminal record. He also kept to himself. Not in a way that seemed secretive. He simply worked, spoke little about his personal life, and went home. Nothing about him had previously suggested violence or erratic behavior. That began to change on Thursday, December 3rd. A coworker saw Exantus arrive unusually energized and euphoric. He walked into her office and began talking at length about how happy he was and how satisfied he felt in his relationships. For a private man who rarely discussed his life, the change was impossible to miss. She compared his energy to Tom Cruise jumping on Oprah Winfrey's couch. At home, Exantus' girlfriend, Loris Burgess, was noticing something else. She would wake during the night and find him already awake, as though he had never gone to bed. It kept happening. Night after night, he appeared not to sleep. Then ordinary social boundaries started disappearing. Between 1 and 3 in the morning, Exantus called Loris's parents just to talk. He sounded calm, as though it were the middle of the afternoon. During one of those early morning calls, he asked for their blessing to propose to their daughter. The request itself was normal. The hour. And his apparent inability to understand why it was strange was not. By Friday, he was also refusing food. Loris brought home takeout, but Exantus said he wasn't hungry and suddenly began crying uncontrollably. During their 2-year relationship, she had never seen him cry before. He still insisted nothing was wrong. The following Sunday, one day before the killing, Loris's father was being baptized. On the drive to church, Exantus began sobbing again. He briefly pulled himself together, but during the service, the crying returned, loud enough to draw attention. Then he stood, moved toward the back of the church, and demanded to speak with the pastors and Loris's mother. After the baptism, his behavior escalated. Exantus shouted that the pastors were detectives and that members of the congregation were undercover police officers. Witnesses could recognize the individual words he used, but the sentences made no sense. One pastor said it was as though the words had been placed in the wrong order. And in the middle of that disruption, Exantus took Loris by the hand, dropped to one knee, and proposed. There was no ring and no apparent plan. Loris pulled him up and led him outside. She tried to calm him, and for the rest of the day, she went along with his rapidly changing ideas. They looked at engagement rings. They ate with her parents, where he cried again. Later, he wanted to sit at a computer and begin planning the wedding. Then, without warning, he ended the relationship. The emotion disappeared. Loris described him as blank. He would not look at her as he repeated that he did not want to be with her, did not want to marry her, would not hurt her, and had to leave. At approximately 8:30 that evening, Exantus walked out carrying only his keys and wallet. The next time investigators spoke with Loris, they were not initially there to explain what had happened in Kentucky. They were conducting a welfare check because Exantus had claimed he had killed her too. That was how she learned about Logan. The people closest to Exantus confirmed that his behavior had changed dramatically before the attack. But a mental crisis could explain his condition without explaining why he drove 3 hours and entered one particular child's bedroom. When medication finally made conversation possible, Exantus described the route himself and said a street sign had given him a mission. The apparent trigger was not a message from Logan, a grudge against his parents, or any connection to Versailles. It was the name of a road. Once medication stabilized Ronald Exantus enough to speak with investigators, he offered his own account of the journey. He said that after leaving Indianapolis, he intended to drive to Florida to be with his mother. There had been no preparation, no luggage, no planned stops. He simply got into his car and headed south. The route carried him across state lines and into Kentucky. From Indianapolis to Versailles is roughly a 3-hour drive, but Exantus did not travel directly there. A receipt placed him at a Taco Bell in Louisville at approximately 12:48 that morning, where he said he stopped for a drink. That receipt gave investigators one fixed point. It did not explain the entire trip. Part of his time on the road remained unaccounted for, and there was no known reason he should have been heading toward the Tiptons' neighborhood. From Louisville, Exantus continued east toward Versailles. He later claimed that when he arrived, he stopped near a church because he believed a wedding was taking place inside. There was no wedding. It was the middle of the night. So Exantus left the church and began wandering through the surrounding residential streets. His description of that walk was bizarrely specific. He said he looked at houses, approached porches, and sat on porch swings belonging to people he did not know. At one property, he noticed a low garage overhang and stopped to perform pull-ups from it. Then he continued walking. Picture that neighborhood asleep around him. A man who had driven from another state was moving from house to house before dawn, sitting on strangers' porches and treating part of a garage like exercise equipment. As strange as those details sound, None of them suggested that he had selected a victim. Then he saw a street sign, Gray's Road. Exantus said the name immediately reminded him of Gray's Anatomy, the television medical drama he had watched while attending nursing school. In his mind, that association led to another thought: surgery. When investigators asked whether he had simply entered a house, seen a child, and decided to stab him, Exantus rejected that description. He said seeing Gray's Anatomy had made him think of surgery. According to his later account, that thought gave purpose to what had been aimless movement. He no longer believed he was merely wandering. He believed he had received a sign and now needed to perform an operation. But we have to be careful here. This was Exantus's explanation after the fact. Investigators could confirm parts of his route, including the Louisville receipt, but they could not independently prove that the road sign caused what happened next. Nor did his account explain why any particular person had to become his patient. Exantus said he kept walking until one house stood out from the others. The Tipton home at 311 Douglas Avenue was illuminated by Christmas lights while the surrounding houses appeared dark. Those decorations had been chosen by Heather and Logan during their last day together. If Exantus's account is accurate, the lights from that happy afternoon may have been the very thing that drew him to their door hours later. He had no invitation. He had no known connection to anyone inside. The front door was reportedly unlocked, and he walked in. Once inside, Exantus said he needed instruments for the surgery he believed he had been sent to perform. He entered the kitchen, opened drawers, and collected whatever looked useful: knives, forks, spoons, and even a spatula. That detail matters because it shows how his stated belief translated into physical choices. He did not arrive carrying surgical equipment. He armed himself with objects taken from the family's own kitchen, then began moving through their home in search of someone to operate on. Eventually, he went upstairs to the room where the children were sleeping. Investigators found some of the collected utensils on the floor near Logan's bed, but Exantus never gave them a clear explanation for choosing Logan instead of one of the other children in that room. There was no evidence that he knew Logan, had seen him before, or had entered the house looking specifically for him. Proximity may have mattered. Chance may have mattered. The evidence does not allow us to say more. And that may be the most disturbing answer available. Nothing the Tiptons had done placed them in Exantus's path. Every available account points to a catastrophic encounter created by random movement, an illuminated house, and an unlocked door. Investigators could trace how Exantus reached Versailles, entered the home, armed himself, and arrived upstairs. What they could not do was turn that route into a rational motive for choosing Logan. That missing motive would become the center of the trial, but the prosecution and defense would offer radically different explanations for the same behavior. The trial was never mainly about identifying Logan's attacker. Both sides agreed that Ronald Exantus had done it. They fought over whether his mind could legally make him a murderer, and the evidence about his mental state did not end at the Tipton home. Between Exantus's booking in December 2015 and his transfer to the Kentucky Correctional Psychiatric Center on February 23, 2016, jail staff filed roughly 20 incident reports. He persistently banged on his cell door. At times, he urinated or defecated on himself. His behavior remained disorganized, erratic, and difficult to control. Once transferred, Exantus was evaluated by multiple mental health professionals. He received Celexa for anxiety and depression, along with Risperdal, an antipsychotic medication. Treatment made him more capable of communicating, but the reported symptoms continued. Exantus said television programs were sending him messages. He described auditory and visual hallucinations. During one meeting, he told a social worker that he could not understand her because she was speaking backward and communicating in parables. She wasn't. The evaluators did not rely only on what Exantus told them. They reviewed body camera footage from the arrest, booking videos, and recorded interrogations. They considered what Loris Burgess and her family had witnessed, along with accounts from his coworkers, the pastors, and people who had watched his behavior unravel at church. Dr. Kenneth Benedict became one of the important experts for the defense. The defense evidence supported the conclusion that Exantus had been psychotic before, during, and after the attack, and that he was not deliberately manufacturing those symptoms to escape responsibility. That distinction mattered because Exantus faced several separate charges: first-degree burglary, Logan's murder, second-degree assault involving Coral, second-degree assault involving another sibling, and fourth-degree assault involving Dean. The physical acts were largely undisputed. Exantus had entered the home. He had attacked Logan and members of the family. He had admitted what he did. But criminal law also asks what was happening in a defendant's mind. For the insanity defense, The critical question was whether Exantus could appreciate the nature or wrongfulness of his actions at the time. In plain English, did he understand what he was doing? And did he understand that it was wrong? The defense said no. Its position was that Exantus had experienced a genuine, unprovoked psychotic break. In that state, he believed he was receiving signs, carrying out a mission, and performing surgery, not committing burglary and murder. The defense argued that this eliminated the culpable mental state required for those crimes. Prosecutors offered a very different explanation. They argued that Exantus's behavior did not necessarily prove an underlying mental illness. Instead, they suggested it could have resulted from voluntarily taking synthetic marijuana, bath salts, or another dissociative drug capable of producing paranoia, hallucinations, sleeplessness, and psychosis. Prosecution experts, including a psychiatrist and a toxicologist, testified that his presentation could be consistent with synthetic drug intoxication. If Exantus had voluntarily taken such a substance, the legal analysis could look very different from an illness that emerged without his control. But there was a major problem with that theory. No synthetic intoxicant was confirmed. The defense pointed to post-arrest blood testing that reportedly detected only a non-active marijuana metabolite or ingredient. There was no confirmed bath salt, synthetic cannabinoid, or dissociative drug in the reported result. That did not prove Exantus had taken nothing. Some synthetic substances can be difficult to detect through ordinary testing. But possibility is not the same as evidence, and the jury had to decide what the record actually supported. Was this an unprovoked psychotic break? Voluntary intoxication that standard testing failed to capture? Or a mental state that did not fit neatly into either explanation? In 2018, the jury returned a split verdict. Exantus was found not guilty by reason of insanity on the charges of murdering Logan and burglarizing the Tipton home. But he was found guilty but mentally ill on the assault charges involving Coral, the other sibling, and Dean. You can see why that felt impossible to the family. How could one man be legally insane for the murder and burglary, yet still criminally responsible for assaults committed during the same episode? Legally, jurors were evaluating separate offenses, each with its own required mental state. But outside the language of jury instructions, the result looked like two different versions of Exantus had occupied the same bedroom on the same night. The Kentucky Supreme Court later upheld the outcome. Exantus received a 20-year sentence, but that sentence came from the assault convictions, not from a conviction for Logan's murder. So the jury accepted insanity as a defense to the killing and burglary, but not as a complete defense to the attacks on the survivors. Exantus went to prison for assaulting Logan's family, not for killing Logan. For the Tiptons, that distinction was already almost impossible to explain to their children. 9 years later, it stopped being an abstract legal distinction and became a question of whether Exantus would be free. In October 2025, the Tipton family learned that the man they had feared might one day return was no longer in a Kentucky prison. Years earlier, Dean had explained what no sentence could restore. He would never again hold Logan or hear him say, "Daddy, I miss you. I'm glad you're home." Exantus still had a future. Logan remained in a graveyard.
I'll never be able to wrap my arms around him again and hear him say, "Daddy, I miss you. I'm glad you're home." I'm never going to get that again. But this man has hope.
I can't explain that to my children. I will never be able to. But I get to deal with the aftermath for the rest of their lives.
That was the permanent divide Dean saw. One life continuing, the other stopped at 6. Heather told the court that when Exantus killed Logan, he slaughtered her entire family. If she ever forgave him, she said, it would be for her own healing, not for his benefit.
When you murdered my son, you slaughtered my entire family. Think about my son. Think about my children and the lives that you've ruined. And remember that I will forgive you for me, not for you.
He gets to go on and live his life. He gets to go one day. He may get to go and hug his children again. I won't. When I go to see my son, I have to go to a graveyard.
The sentence could punish the assaults. It could not return the child at the center of them. The family also rejected the idea that the words mental break should end every discussion of accountability.
They said Ron had a mental break. We've had multiple mental breaks over the last 10 years. It never once gave me the right to go out and commit a...
Their anger was about this case, not a claim that mental illness generally leads to violence. The unresolved issue was what responsibility and long-term supervision should look like after a person is found legally insane. Exantus received 20 years for the assaults, with no murder sentence to serve. Yet in October 2025, after approximately 9 years in custody, he was released. Reports attributed the shortened time to sentence credits connected to good behavior, work hours, and self-improvement programs. His conditions included roughly 6 months of reentry supervision in Florida. For Coral, now an adult, the release carried her straight back to the bedroom where she had fought him as a child. She said her testimony felt disregarded. She and her siblings feared what might happen next, while Heather described the same helplessness she had felt when the verdict left nobody criminally accountable for Logan's death.
Thank you both for being with us, and let us just start with how sorry we are for your loss and everything that you've been through over the past 10 years. How does it feel today to know that Exantus is back on the streets?
It's sickening, infuriating.
There's really no words to explain it. Me and my siblings, we are fearful of what's to come next.
Coral, tell me a little more about that. I mean, you were attacked in your home. This man is now back on the streets. You fear for your safety?
I do. And Ronald Exantus was not charged for murder. And that's the part that is really hard for us to grasp anyway. It's like my testimony did not matter at all. And that's truly just how I feel. I seen the man in my room killing my brother. And now he is just free. It just doesn't make sense to me. This whole crime, this whole case is truly insane. It's sick. And
Right.
It's just, there's no words.
It
Heather-
broke my heart. My heart
Yes,
was
please.
already broken, but it really broke me when they basically told us nobody killed Logan, nobody was going to be held responsible. All I could really do at that point was beg them to give him the max that they could give him for the assault charges. There was nothing else we could do. And I still feel helpless. And now he's out, like walking the streets among us. Like, what do we do?
Has this day haunted you that he would one day be out there once again?
Yes, it has definitely haunted all of us. My husband and I, we had to take a step back from everything to be able to actually grieve. The whole trial process and everything, it was just all a whirlwind. And then that happened, and Dean and I, we just had to take a step back and heal. And we're not fully healed, but I'm stronger now and he's stronger now. And I feel like maybe we can do something now. Maybe it took him getting out after 10 years for people to see what's going on, that this has happened and we need to do something about it. Something has to be done.
The justice system is all about the criminals and it's never about the victim. My grandson was just 6 years old. He never got to grow up, they didn't give him justice.
That distinction still matters legally. Exantus had not escaped all punishment, but as Dean emphasized, he was punished for attacking the survivors, not for murdering his son.
What you've kind of learned about the justice system through this whole process.
You mean the unjust system? That's what it is. There was no justice. There was no accountability for who killed my son. Pretty much we were told nobody did it. And it's a disgrace to Kentucky, and it's a disgrace to our nation, knowing that a man can go in and stab a 6-year-old sleeping boy to death and then plead insanity and walk free. We know he didn't walk free because he got the time for the assaults, but he walked free from the murder of my son.
The release triggered national backlash. Authorities and political figures in Florida and Kentucky publicly argued that the brutality of the original attack outweighed 9 years of good conduct.
I get he was released, from my understanding, on good behavior. Well, I think the overwhelming evil behavior that he exhibited in killing this child and trying to kill others in the same home outweighs any good behavior he could do in the next 400 years. A 20-year sentence, and he didn't even serve half of that, just to be released. It just reignited a nightmare for them, I'm sure. And the outrage, that we've seen from this nationally, I think stems from a few things. It stems from the seemingly loss of common sense in a judicial system in some places to turn somebody like this back out into the public. It's also a willful disregard of the will and the desire of we the people. I know I can speak for we the people here in Florida do not want this type of person out on our streets, around our children. And I think I can speak for we the people in Kentucky when I say they don't want that either.
Those statements reflected outrage and concerns about public safety. They were not formal psychiatric findings about Exantus's condition in 2025. And before that debate could produce any real answer, the situation changed again. Approximately 10 days after his release, Exantus was arrested in Florida for allegedly failing to register as a convicted felon as required by state law. Reports said his residence was near an elementary school, but that proximity was not the stated basis for the arrest. The Tiptons were not directly notified. They learned by watching television news. Dean described shock, relief, sadness, and anxiety arriving almost at once.
How did you find out about Exantus's arrest down here?
Actually watching Fox News. We had just turned it on and it come across breaking news with Will Kane, and that's how we found out that he was arrested.
What's going through your mind at that point when you saw that?
Shock, disbelief, happiness, sadness, everything, all the emotions all wrapped up in one.
It's been, a couple weeks now that he's been out on parole?
Yeah, like a week and a half.
What has that time been like for you?
It's been pretty nerve-wracking. It opened up a lot of scars and wounds that I thought I had healed from, that I have found out obviously I haven't. And it's pretty much the same thing with all my family. Just being on edge, anxiety, breakdowns. I had to take off from work just because my mental state wasn't in a very good spot. I don't want my kids to have to walk around the rest of their life wondering if this man was going to come back and do the job, finish the job that he told them that he was going to do.
The rearrest made the family feel safer, but it also reopened trauma they had spent years trying to contain. Exantus was extradited to Kentucky, and the latest information suggests he could again become eligible for release within roughly a year. So Dean created a daily ritual. Each morning, he opens the Marion County Sheriff's Department website, searches the inmate list, and types in Exantus's name just to confirm that he is still there.
I get up every morning and get on the Marion County Sheriff's Department website, pull up the inmate list, type his name in just to check and make sure he's there. It's just, honestly, it feels like it's just been a mess from the start. It wasn't handled correctly by anybody. This guy crossed state lines and committed a murder. I think that makes it federal.
If I cross paths with him, you're going to make me a criminal. And I will gladly spend the rest of my life behind bars to know that my family, that she is safe and my children are safe. Because he said, I'm going to kill your entire family.
That is what temporary relief looks like for this family. Refreshing a web page to make sure the man they fear remains behind bars. The timing made it worse. December 2025 marked 10 years since Logan's death. The family said the release forced them to relive December 7th all over again, only this time without the adrenaline that had carried them through the original crisis.
It's been 10 years, and yet, here you are reliving some of these things. How hard is that?
It's like reliving December 7th all over again, that whole time period, and maybe a little worse, because during that time we had adrenaline going. This time it was just all a shock and kind of caught us by surprise.
And beneath every legal argument is the life Logan never got to reach. At 16, would he have been tall? Would he still have played football? Would he have remained the same gentle, affectionate boy his family remembered?
And I often wonder, how big would Logan be? What would his temperament, his personality be like? Would he still be the same gentle, loving little boy?
Those are the only versions of Logan's future the family allows itself to imagine. The questions they ask, not answers anyone can supply. They are now advocating for a proposal they call Logan's Law. It would require people found not guilty by reason of insanity to remain in secure institutions for life. But that proposal leaves a difficult conflict unresolved. Is indefinite confinement justified after an insanity verdict? If not, what continuing psychiatric treatment and supervision should be mandatory? And what evidence should be required before someone can safely return to the community? The first release lasted only days. Exantus is back in custody for now, but the Tiptons do not know how long for now will last. Two facts still resist each other. A jury concluded that Exantus was legally insane when Logan was killed. Years later, the system concluded that enough of his sentence for assaulting the surviving family members had been served. Meanwhile, Logan's family keeps checking an inmate list, waiting to learn which conclusion will determine what happens next. Do you believe the verdict and release conditions amounted to justice? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe for the next episode of Dark Crime Storytime.